the view options command is one of my most used tools in Wysiwyg. It comes up so often. Now there's ways you can create presets of your views, your favourite views, so you can jump in and out of them. So when I was working at the Opera House, in fact, actually for any production I've done, when I come to think of it, I create a standard stock set of preset views. That would be one for focusing, one for plotting, one for showing a director, and one that just keeps all the lights up so you can see the scenery really easily and not worry too much about the lights. These will do things like adjust your beam intensity or footprint focus so you can see the beams really clearly on the stage, or you can see the haze really clearly in case you're doing a lot of aerial effects. Or maybe you just want to turn all the lights up so you can see the scenery really clearly, so you can make sure that borders are in the right place and you can see exactly what's going on with the set. So I would often use view options to optimize the look of the scene, but also responding to whatever a lighting designer is trying to work on at the time. If they can't quite see something, I might adjust the view options just to make the haze a little bit stronger so they can see where the beam's coming from. Even if there's no haze in the show, it's just kind of useful as a visual aid to see where the beam's coming. I may affect the ambient light so they can see what's going on with the scenery when it's usually a bit too dark to tell. And I'm constantly listening to what's going on, thinking about what they're doing. And I'll just have the view options window open on another screen. I'll just drag it across and keep it there so that I can be listening to what they're doing and just tweaking things. I don't think people ever really realised that I was doing it actually, but it's just a nice little trick of a Wysiwyg operator to help the designer get through their process. So we're going to just deep dive into this because it is probably one of the most important tools to make your production look good. And I can remember the first time I really got involved in Wysiwyg. Initially, I couldn't make anything look right. I just couldn't get the scenes to look neat, and it's because I didn't understand how to get the view options to look as they should be in real life to get the best out of the system. And it wasn't until I figured this out that I suddenly went, oh, right, okay, now I understand how to make Wysiwyg work for me. Because so often you create a scene that just looks like garbage, and it's because these settings are all wrong. So it is an important lesson. We're going to spend a bit of time on it, and we're going to quickly be moving on then to something else. So in lesson 34, we are going to look at view options. For this, I'm going to jump across to my shaded mode because I want to have a nice big full screen as much as I can. I have loads of these windows here now, which is a bit annoying, takes up some of my screen space. So what I'd normally do, as I mentioned before, I'm running 4 monitors here, so I'd normally right click, I'd go open a pop-up frame, create a new instance of this. Bear in mind that each new instance draws more power from the graphics card, and I could have that view maybe sitting on a different monitor. What I usually do when I was working at Opera House, if I had a facility for it in any other productions I work in, I would have one screen showing a view from the front, another one that shows a view from the side or from the back, so that you can see what's going on the side of the stage. It's quite handy, and so we can jump across to look at different views there. So that's quite handy if you needed to manage your model a bit better. In fact, what's quite useful is to show a wireframe side view, so you can see the beams hitting borders and things. You can see it quite clearly. In here you can sort of see where you're hitting a border, you can see where the beam's going, but in CAD view, when it's in live or design, you can see really clearly where the beams are going. So let's try and make this look a bit nicer. I'm going to take you to the view options. Now you can get to this in 2 ways. It's up here, options, view options, or you can right click in the screen and just go to view options. Now there's a few bits I'm going to take you through. I'm going to start with general. The only thing that's really useful in here is view statistics, which just gives you some data about what's going on in the scene. Generally, green's good, red's bad. I've done a lot of productions where we had a lot of red. It depends on your graphics card. So I'm running a GTX 1080 on this PC. It's a bit of an old graphics card now actually. It's a couple of years old, but in the PC that I hire out for Wysiwyg commercially, and in my laptop I use my work, I've got an RTX 2070, which is a lot more powerful when it does a lot more calculations per second. But to be honest, I haven't yet done a production that the 1080 couldn't handle. So you can pick up a 1080 now for a couple £100. So if you're looking at building a PC, the graphics card is, in my opinion, the most important component you're going to need. Make sure you spend a couple £100 on a good one. So carrying on, simulation. We've got ambient light, which we had a look at a moment ago. Just think of this as your working light. Basically, if this is all the way up, you can see things really clearly. If it's all the way down, you can't see the set, but you get just pure lighting. Bear in mind that your lights in this world, they don't bounce. And we're going to go through that in just 1 second. I'm going to explain slight caveat to that statement, but this isn't a ray tracing engine. Ray tracing, when I first started in lighting, in architectural lighting, it was it was about 2002, and we were doing lighting calculations for buildings to work out the light levels on the floor. It used a ray tracing engine. It would calculate up to about 40 or 50 bounces of light as it bounced around the scene, and that would take sometimes a day or maybe 2 days to calculate the amount of light, say coming through a window or coming out of an array of lights, to work out what the light level would be in one place. And that's how you could create a really accurate lighting model of a 3D model. But we don't have ray tracing in here. I would just point out that Unreal Engine, which is a gaming engine, which is in some ways very similar, but also completely different from what we're looking at right now. They now implemented real-time ray tracing, which is just an astounding achievement. If you're interested in tech, just have a look at how they're using real-time ray tracing in Unreal Engine in UE4. It's absolutely fascinating. So the reason I'm telling you that is that I like to leave my ambient light up just a little bit, like 3 or 4%, because there's no bounce light. So if you turn it off entirely, it can look a little bit dark. So we'll just put it on a little bit. We then got the ambient color of that ambient light. We can make it red, and all the ambient light goes red. I have no idea why you'd ever need this feature. I don't know why you want your ambient light to be anything other than white, because it's a functional light. It doesn't really serve any artistic purpose, but I'm sure somebody's got a reason. It must have been there for a reason. In the quality mode, this is where we can really make or break our system. Volumetric is sort of the standard. That's the newer version of rendering. So we can change that to be in high, medium, or low. And you can see how the quality is reducing each time. Stick it back at high. And we go into enhanced mode, which is a sort of an older version of the calculation of lighting rendering. We have the same thing. And you can see it's made a big change to the lighting beams and how it calculates light. You can see the beams in the air changing there quite drastically as I go from high to low. And then we've got the performance quality. So we can't drag that around for enhance, but if we go back to volumetric, we can err on the side of quality or err on the side of performance. Very hard to see the difference actually. We're seeing a little bit in the beams. But yeah, what this is going to do is affect the processing. So if we look at our statistics here, you can see our FPS, frames per second. Looking a bit low there, it's not actually going to be that low. When we start running it, it's occasionally jumping up to new numbers. But you can see that it would, in theory, oh no, it's actually the complete opposite. When you go to performance, it's going lower than when you're going up to quality. So the idea is that the scene would run more efficiently in performance and it would look better in quality. So I always have it like this because I believe in having good hardware, which means I can run Wysiwyg to the max to make it look as good as I can for the designers. Enhanced projected video, in my experience, just makes it a little bit brighter, but it does, I think, make the resolution a little bit clearer. But again, it impacts on your performance, and that's what this is all about here. It's about getting the best quality for the performance. We can adjust our beams to make them look a bit nicer. We see in volumetric mode, yeah. So let's take our beams down a bit. So what I might do is in a time when I'm plotting, I might have my beams turned down, footprint sort of at a medium level, and lens flare up quite high, so we can see how it's going to look, and it will look more blended, all the lights on at once. But if I'm focusing, I'll have my beam exposure turned right up, footprint turned right up, and my beams will probably be quite high as well, but I need to set it in a way that I can see quite clearly where the beam's going, because that's really handy to help see where the lights are when there's just you're working one at a time. It looks quite bad here because I'm trying to control lots of lights at once. Now, if you're thinking this all looks really rubbish, you're right, it does. So these features on the right here are what are causing this to look bad, mainly because we haven't got shadows turned on. So what's the difference when I click on this? There we go. So now all our shadows are cutting off on the borders. They're not penetrating through the stage floor. We're starting to get a look that's a bit more realistic. And now if we turn on our beams a bit more, it looks a bit more natural. Soft shadows just makes those shadows a little bit smoother, so it responds a bit more like real life. See that? So I would take underneath the stair here, for instance, it's black and quite sharp, but soft shadows just blends it all in a little bit, just as it would in real life. And the footprint will just make the beam just a little bit, it sort of puts a spot in the middle of it, so it It's not a completely flat field. It's got a heat in the middle and just tails off at the edges. But you can see again what it's doing with this TW1 wash on the edge. Just make it a little bit neater. Materials, we haven't really looked at materials because fundamentally I can never see them do anything. Materials are not the textures that we apply to our scenes. This is looking at how we can control reflection, specularity, all the sort of the properties of when light bounces off a material. Don't get excited when you see reflections. It is not possible to do a mirror. Now, there is a time when I managed to make something work in reflections. It wasn't what I was thinking it was going to be. But no, you can't see a light bounce off a reflective surface on your set and then bounce onto the stage. It just doesn't do that. So don't get excited about that. And for my money, just turn it off because it uses up quite a lot of processing power and doesn't really achieve much. It's more looking at the reflections inside the material. So it's how the lights might interact with the edge of a material and what you can see, actually on that object, as opposed to how the light might bounce off of it. So there, that's that. Now, performance. The only time I ever use this, if I really want to get rid of a lot of the stuff in the scene, let's just turn the ambient light on so we can see this. If I turn off my hanging structure, it turns off my bars and trusses. I can turn off my fixtures as well. This does just save on the object count a little bit and gives you less to render. So you see I've got 509 objects. If I turn off my hang structures, it jumps down to 466. Turning off fixtures doesn't do anything, but it does save a little bit on the processing. Trust me, it does. We can also auto-enable the FPS. So if we want to guarantee that we're going to get the best frames per second all the time, we enable this. We set our target and a sort of quality threshold that we're willing to accept, and it will drop all of our quality settings to ensure that we're maintaining the right frames per second. So if you're doing a lot of very fast plotting and you need to see something running to speed, you need to see the chases running, and you're willing to compromise quality, this is a way of doing it to help try and guarantee it. But it's not an exact science. It doesn't actually guarantee 25 frames per second. It might just try its best to get there, but you'll see your quality settings flickering around. What I would always do is just come into simulation and just see what I can turn off. Do I need soft shadows? Do I need the hotspot? Just for that sequence maybe. Jumping into visual effects, the CGI and film and games industry use these two terms quite a lot: global illumination and ambient occlusion. Global illumination is a bounced light method. Now I did say we don't do bounced light in Wysiwyg, but this is the exception. If I click it on, you can see it's just created a little bit of a glow. There's two different approximation methods. And you can see what it's trying to do. It's trying to just calculate where the light is, where it's hotter and how it would bounce around. I find approximation method 2 works better, just for my money, but it could be different for you. If we change the range, we can make it bigger and smaller, the bubble of light. And you can see it's flickering, it's trying to calculate as it's going. So this is where it's not that great because it can just look a bit distracting. We can make the bounce light brighter or darker, and we can affect the quality of it so that it's got high resolution or low resolution. We've also got, I'll turn that off, we've got ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is a way of creating shadows where you get them in real life. So if you look at anything in the environment around you, you'll see there's shadows sort of around the corners of objects. Ambient occlusion just fills in all those little pockets where it expects there to be some sort of shadow. So you see it quite clearly there at the back of the set. Just helps you to make out definitions in the scenery. So we can turn that right down, we can turn it right up. So that's quite a useful feature. You turn both on together, you get something a bit more realistic. What I would say about these two is that the reason they're here is that there is a rendering tool. The rendering tool is, I'm not going to show it to you because frankly it's been replaced by the live view. The shaded view, when I first started using Wysiwyg, was pretty basic. First time I used it was around about 2000, 2001, release 14 to 20, something like that was when I first started. And a beam of light was literally just a cone coming out of a very crude looking black light. So if you wanted to see what it's going to look like, you'd have to render it, and you'd send it to the render options, which is down here if you're interested in trying it. You've got a render tool, you can click through the dialog box and it will do your rendering, and it won't look as good as the view is now in the live view. So in order to make it look better, they've added these two features on the basis that you're only going to use them when you're taking a picture of your scene. If you leave these on when you try and do a lot of plotting, it will absolutely kill your performance and your FPS will go down. And you want that to be as high as possible, ideally at least 25 frames a second, which is the refresh rate of most screens, depending on the power supply and depending on where you are in the world. 25 frames per second is something that your eye can cope with and see a natural refresh rate. So we might want to turn these off for those sort of projects. I actually leave these on when I was doing opera, because what we were doing was so slow. We're generally looking at scenes that are very static like this. I wanted the best looking image, and if one or two lights were moving at a time and had a very, very slight lag, or it was slowly updating the bloom from the global illumination, that's absolutely fine. We can come to that as or deal with it as it comes. A couple more features. You've got the source disk here. Just you can see in the TW1 just turns on that source disk, makes it a bit larger or smaller. So if you're doing a like a TV show and you've got some LED pixel lights facing at the camera, you can turn that on. Light emission glow is not useful here because I haven't got any light emission features turned on, but for instance these LED panels, later on I'll show you how we can turn those into emissive panels that glow. If we turn this on, it would increase the glow coming out of those, so it makes that look quite nice. Environment, we can change our smoke to be sort of different density, so that's sort of the haze we had before if we scroll this up, but we can also make it quite dense and foggy. We can animate it so it moves very slowly. There you go, just very imperceptibly moving, just gives it a bit more realism. Again, all these things, they slow it down a little bit, so you might not, if you don't need it, you might not want it. Turbulence just puts a bit of more movement in it, and I love this. This is new. Enable ground smoke just puts a bit of smoke around the floor, which I find really nice. So as I move around the scene now, if I just click OK, it's going to move around the scene. I can feel it's lagging very slightly just as I move the mouse. It's not moving quite so smoothly. You can see that the ambient occlusion really trying to calculate what's going on up there and not doing a very good job of it. You can sort of see what the smoke's doing, and this is how we start to make it look nice. You really have to play with it. Now what I used to do is I would create a range of shaded views. Now we've got two different ways of doing that. We've got shaded view output up here, and shaded view settings here, where we can change these things quite quickly. It's exactly the same as we just had, but we can manipulate them here if we want to change our ambient light. It's a much better way of doing it than going to the view options. What I used to do is just create that view options window and drag it over onto my my spare screen, so I could be constantly manipulating it during a session. So if a designer was working on something and I could see that based on my experience as a designer that what they were looking at wasn't quite what I expect reality to be, I might just tweak it a little bit so it felt a bit more balanced, or maybe just bring the haze out so they could see what they're focusing. If we go down to shade view settings down here, just like when we created looks, if we right click, go new shaded view profile, let's call it test. It gets rid of all the settings we just had, but we can then jump in here. We can change it to, let's take down the ambient light, let's turn up the beam exposure, turn up the footprint, bit of beam, soft shadows, hotspots on, put the quality up. Visual effects, I'm going to turn on my ambient occlusion but not my global illumination, and I'm going to add some animated smoke. There we go. Might look very similar, but that's now under test. If I jump back to default, it will change the settings again. You see my statistics turning on and off there as well. So that's something that's in my settings. So I might have one for plotting, one for focusing, one for just doing some generic work if I want to see how things are looking in the scene while I'm modelling. I might have a setting for that too, and then you can start to see how that looks with the different looks. There you go. Different modes there. So that's looks. So I'm going to leave it there with design mode. I don't want to spend any more time on it because if you're using design mode, then you kind of, I've shown you everything you need to know just to get on with it. But frankly, I think most people are going to be interested in what's coming in a couple of chapters' time, which is live mode, where we start to use a lighting desk to do all this, and we can have another look at view options a bit more then. But for now, we're going to call it a day. We're going to move on to chapter 7 soon. We're going to look at the presentation mode, which is where we create all of our paperwork and documentation if we want to use the Wysiwyg system to create all that for us. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.